Hi all, let's look at forks today. So if you go to chessworld.net, improved puzzle books, you'll find in the tactics section fork tactics, and there's a description here. In chess terminology, a fork is not a piece of cutlery, but in fact it's a chess tactic where a single piece makes two or more direct attacks simultaneously. So it does actually help eat the opponent's pieces quite often, like a fork in the cutlery sense would. In chess though, two pieces are threatened, which is also sometimes termed a double attack. The attacker usually aims to gain material by winning one of the opponent's pieces. The defender often finds it difficult to counter two or more threats in a single move. So in chess, it's a turn-based game, and we usually can only play one move at a time. And so things like forks are pretty dangerous to have to handle. The attacking piece is called the forking piece. The pieces attacked are said to be forked, and quite often it helps if the fork is also a check, as some of the examples in the book show. That further compels the opponent to handle something else as well, the fact of being check. So let's have a look at some examples of this quite fundamental tactic, which is used within very good combinations. Sometimes there's often an element of forking. So here, black to play and win. What would you play in this position? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video. Okay, bishop takes f2 check. Now we have knight g4 check. The king went to e1. If the king had gone to f1, we have knight e3. There's a nice fork there. And on g1 we have queen b6, and that's lethal, that diagonal. Now here, has white escaped knight e3, which does fork queen and bishop. It compels this check. But now bishop d7, and maybe white was thinking, well, knight takes, and then there's king f2, and the knight's kind of trapped. But in fact, the knight in the center can do more than just take on g2. Can you see what black can play here? A very powerful fork indeed. Okay, knight c2, forking king, queen and rook, but we'd like to take the queen off after. So that was a forking example. And there's other tactical ideas in this. You can see these other tags now. If you want to look them up, you can also click on them and go to the Chess World Glossary, by the way, to see further examples and stuff, information about any tags mentioned there. So anyway, let's go to the next fork example. Now here, we said it's often even better that the fork involves a check. So that's a little clue for this one. If I give you 5 seconds here, what would you play in this position? Okay. Now not rook takes e6, because you might think king takes, bishop b5 check, but it's not check, and the opponent, because it's not check, the opponent has more options and can actually take our bishop and then queen the pawn and end up winning. So it's actually better to not rush it, as the title says here. There's another much stronger move. Bishop c4 check. So the bishop is out of harm's way of the rook. And now, can you see why this is so powerful now? This fork tactic, when it's got the spice, added spice of being check as well. Okay. With added spice, rook takes e8, check, and now bishop b5 is check, forking the king and rook, double attacking the king and rook. And then we can stop that pawn very easily after bishop up, winning. Now in this example, we can set up a fork with a preliminary move. Can you spot it? Okay. Bishop takes e3, damages white's control of c2, and we can pounce in to c2 now. And after the rook moves, knight takes e3, forking the two rooks and the king. Is a check as well. Killer check makes the fork all the more nice to use. So winning material there. Now here, the knight is not the only one that can double attack or fork pieces. So what can black play in this position? 5 seconds. Okay, g5, because now we can double attack bishop and knight. Be wary in real games though, weakening your king can sometimes backfire, but it doesn't here in this particular case. But sometimes, yeah, you've got to look at your king safety when you move pawns around your king. So here, you may remember this example from another video in the series. White to play. Okay. A fork is kind of set up because of this interference move, knight e6. Because otherwise queen takes was threatened. But now we have what's been given up, basically, is the key question. Or the weakness of the last move, or what's been given up is maybe more concise. When the queen has taken on e6, the queen has given up the f8 square, and that's a mighty juicy fork. And it's actually, in this case, it's checkmate as well. So this has an element of interference as well as a fork. Now this one, it looks as though we're in trouble here because of queen takes h3. You might want to pause the video. Okay, rook check. And now there's a pinned piece. We can actually celebrate that with rook e3, defending h3. And here we can set up a fantastic fork with check. I wonder if you can spot how. Okay. Rook takes d4, whack. Now rook d3, and we get a mighty fork with check. Knight e5, check. Winning. Now here, this is a real fork celebration. White to play. Pause the video if you want. Okay, queen takes f5, opening up that g file. Now knight e4, check. Now queen takes g3. Does that ruin everything? Not quite. We don't have to be content with knight takes, in which case we'd be the exchange down. We can actually play knight takes f6 check. And now we don't have to be content with f takes g. A fork saves us losing material with knight h5, forking queen and king. Very nice. We end up having knight and bishop against rook there, as well as rook each. So we're up on material. There's a nice fork setup here. Can you spot it? Okay, bishop g5 check, trying to lure the king to g5 for this. Otherwise, we were winning the queen anyway. But now the juicy fork, knight takes f7 check. Forking queen and king. Okay, how can we set up a juicy fork here? Okay. Might want to pause. Rook e8. Element of decoy as well, setting up this juicy fork with knight f6, double attacking queen and king. And then actually, we can even take here after, just to rub salt in the wound there. Now here, can you spot what can be played here? Okay, rook takes f7 check. So if king takes, there was knight takes d6, nice fork. But alas here, it's even worse fate. In a way, knight g5, checkmate. Can't get much stronger than a mate in one. So, in this position, the knight is holding the queen. So you might think, if only you had knight f7, because rook takes, you could take the queen if the knight wasn't protecting the queen. So there's a great move to start off with, which kicks off with that idea in mind, actually trying to win this queen. Okay, and that's rook f8 check. The king moved. If knight takes, there was knight f7, forking king and queen. On rook takes, there was queen takes e5. Now here, a very, very nice tactic is used. Rook f7, queen takes h7, and queen takes f7. So there was a fork behind the scenes there, which was black tried to avoid it. Now here, pause if you want. Check, reaching the critical position. If only we could stop the king escaping, this would be mate. How can we use a fork here? Indeed we can. Knight d7, check. And if bishop takes, this would be mate. So black resign here, be losing the queen. Okay. So in this position, pause the video. Ready? Knight takes d6. It is forking queen and king, so, but it's been eliminated. That forking piece has been eliminated, but there's another one now with bishop takes d5, forking queen and king again. Ah, the pain of chess. Black thought maybe they had escaped, but now to be forked again with this horrible check wins the queen. So here, our pieces are attacked here. We've got to be a bit careful about any slow moves. We've also got a weakened back row. So if we move the rook, there's also things to consider, like the checks on b8 or a8 as well. But we can do something very, very forcing here. Can you see? We can take on g1, check, and that's winning, because we're going to be taking on c1 and then taking on e3, which would be a fork of g1 and c1. Okay, so that's absolutely winning there. In this position, from a game of Kasparov against Ligterink, knight, where can the knight go? It can go to b6. Now, is this awkward for black? Bishop takes. Now here, Kasparov actually kind of centralized his bishop. So it's not only reinforcing the threat on a8, but now he's looking at h7. Can white exploit this somehow? Wonderful move here, which also combines a bit of interference. Okay, there's a knight fork, yeah, which is interfering with the connection there. So hitting that knight, that's taken. And now we have an almighty fork, queen f5, hitting the rook, which is unprotected, and h7. And black resigns here. If the rook moves, we take, and then queen h8 is mating. So a very powerful example there. Double attack. Now here, if only we could play queen g4, because then on king h8, there's queen g7 checkmate. So white playing here, you might want to pause the video. Okay, knight d4. So black tried to parry queen g4. Now, in this position, can we kind of use a fork stroke deflection to deflect the knight away from defending this defensive square? White to play here. A wonderful kind of, not just double attack, treble attack, quadruple attack move exists. Okay. Knight c6, hitting queen, knight, bishop and rook. Not too many options there. If the queen, say, moves to a4, we could take on, for example, e7 check which is nasty. Winning a whole piece for nothing. And if the knight takes, then we're back to queen g4 check, and then after king h8, queen g7 checkmate. So this is a crushing blow. Black resigns here. So I hope you got something from these examples of double attack. And yes, the added spice of when the opponent's also in check makes the double attack or the fork even more effective. And some of these show. Hope you got something from that. All comments, questions, subscribes with the notification bell, really appreciated. Thanks very much. Check these out on the improved menu puzzle books at chessworld.net, and you'll see to practice your forks, which could be updated as well every so often for some more training there. Okay, thanks again.